So, Mark, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here, Jeff.
So, give us a little background on who you are and how you came to be doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I've pretty much been a full-time investor, really my whole career. I bought my first real estate property, fixed it and flipped it when I was 18 years old. So it's kind of all I've known, entrepreneur, investor, the lines get kind of blurred there. And I think I've lived through multiple boom and bust cycles, and so it's kind of shaped my worldview in a certain way. When I was a young adult, I got to participate in the dot-com boom, investing through the dot-com boom. I started an e-commerce business when the dot-com boom turned into a crash. I experienced starting an e-commerce business and had vendors literally laugh at me and tell me that no one would ever buy anything online. That was ridiculous. And I proved them wrong. So I've had experience in that. I managed to make a lot of money, multiple business exits, Fortune 500 exits, so lots and lots of real estate investment deals, development deals. But in 2008, I got wiped out. And mainly because I didn't understand one basic premise of investing. And also I was really good at making money, but I didn't really understand this whole financial casino and what was going on in that world. And so I vowed to myself that would never happen again. I learned one core concept that really changed everything for me. And that core concept is that money is like energy. So what that means is that money doesn't disappear. Instead, it transfers. And that's a key concept. And so what that means is when I lost all my money, someone else got all my money. And that didn't really sit well with me. I'm not the most competitive person, but to think that I lost my money and somebody else got my money, I wasn't super happy with that. And so I vowed to figure this out and that would never happen to me again. And so I've spent the last 12 years studying wealth transfers and that whole phenomenon, how wealth transfers happen, and in the hopes of putting myself onto the receiving end of the wealth transfer instead of on the giving end of the wealth transfer. And so I've spent the last 12, 13 years focusing on that specifically. I'm a student of history, trying to figure out how things happen in the past so I can understand how they may repeat or rhyme again in the future. And so I've been studying that, paying attention to that. In 2015, I took another deep look at Bitcoin. I was in the process of setting up offshore bank accounts and offshore trusts, trying to diversify my life out of being dependent on one country. And so I was in the process of actually setting that up in Panama at the time, working on bank accounts so I could work on a path to citizenship or at least a passport. And I took another look at Bitcoin and I realized it was kind of the same thing. I can get my money out of the banking system. I could be sovereign. I could be independent. And I think ultimately that's what I wanted. And so I did. And once I started digging in, I started learning more. I started to realize that, the world was, in my opinion at that time, was already too far gone. And there was really nothing I could do to change that or fix that, I should say. But I found a new tool that I thought that could finally deliver us what we needed, could deliver us freedom and sovereignty. So I decided to dedicate my career towards that. And I've spent the last 5-6 years creating content, researching markets, producing content. I have a YouTube channel, gets about 1.5 million views a month, putting out sound money theology, right? Ideology, and teaching people what the problem is with the money being distorted and how the future can be different if we can get back to what real money is. And so that brings us to where we are right now.
So there's about 15 things I want to unpack out of that, but I actually want to go back to, you said you were a student of history and you were looking at how it applies to right now. What patterns are you seeing that are re-emerging? What are some of the patterns from history that enlighten you right now?
Well, there's many. Everything in life has cycles, right? So natural law. I like to take very complex subjects, but break them down to their most basic, almost what we would call first principles. And I think people overcomplicate issues, but when you understand them on the basic level, then you can understand them better at the higher level. And so I like to look at like natural law. And so nature has cycles: summer, spring, winter, fall, right? You must sow before you reap, things like that. And so we have several cycles that we look at, and we have 4-year presidential cycles and business cycles and credit cycles and all these cycles. But there's 3 cycles that I've been studying, and they're all converging right at the same time. And a couple of them are pretty powerful. So one of them is was made popular in a book called The Fourth Turning, and it's an 80-year cycle that just cycles over and over and over. And it's basically spelled up in, hard times. Hard times bring great men bring great times bring weak men, and weak men bring bad times. And you cycle again, bad times bring great men, and it cycles over and over. And that's an 80-year cycle. And part of what happens during that cycle is that the great times bring weak men, and the weak men bring bad times. And so we're there at that fourth cycle, and what's happened is we're working against natural law. And so what do I mean by that? Well, natural law, like gravity, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how much money you have, you're subject to gravity. Now, you could suspend that temporarily, but it's always going to come back. And so a natural law is that you must sow before you reap. Obviously, you must produce before you consume. Obviously. However, we're in a situation today where we have an entire generation, or maybe even a second generation of people who are living off the production of the past. They have never produced anything in their life. And the problem, so that's the great men, the hard times brought great men, the great men brought great times. And so those great times, they were able to stockpile enormous wealth. And it's allowed now 2 generations of people to live off that wealth and have never had to deal with reality, never had to produce. And the problem is that they've made their way into academia, and they've made their way into public policy, and they're making laws and teaching things that are against what I would consider to be natural law. And they've lost touch of reality, and that's causing all types of problems that we're seeing evident throughout everything today. And so back to that cycle, at the fourth turning at the end of that 80-year cycle, what happens is things basically come to a head, and then massive change happens. I'm always reminded by this quote from Vladimir Lenin. He said that there's decades where nothing happens, and then there's days where decades seem to happen. And he's talking probably specifically about the fourth turning, because at that time we'll have massive change. So that's one thing throughout history, and it repeats every 80 years. Every 80 years. It's kind of like a pendulum, almost like if we were playing bowling and we put the bumpers up, and the ball just kind of bumps back and forth. And so things kind of swing back and forth. They kind of have to get so bad over here that change happens, and then they overcorrect and come to here.
You mentioned 3 things. So what are the other pieces of this that are converging?
Yeah. So at the same time, what's interesting is, and there's lots of things that we could layer on top of this, but the other 2 things that I'm looking at specifically, one of them is being that again, we have another cycle that continues to go on, and the world is swinging back and forth from what would be called a period of centralization, all about we're in this together, globalism, and then that's rejected, and then the world goes all the way over here to individualism, and about the individual person, or what we call decentralization. And that's about an 80-year swing. And so we can see 80 years ago, approximately end of World War II, creation of the UN. The EU was kind of first getting its forming, obviously the Bretton Woods Agreement, one world currency, et cetera, et cetera. So the world started shifting to this centralization. And I think it's pretty evident to anybody paying attention that we are almost, maybe if not now, at peak globalism. And obviously, we've seen the rise of the NGOs, the 3-letter organizations that are running the world. So the World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization, and the World Meteorological Association, the IMF, et cetera. And so we're getting to that point of more globalization. But I believe right now, we're starting to see the world reject that. We're seeing, the rise of populism and nationalism all over the world. Pre-pandemic, we had 8 countries, I believe, with about 1 million people each in the streets protesting. So we're seeing that. Obviously, Brexit, Donald Trump, those are all signs of that. So the world is rejecting that peak globalism, and will start to swing back to decentralization at a time in the fourth turning where massive change happens. But then there's one more thing that we'll layer on top of that, and that is technology revolutions. This is a big one. So we've had 4 technological revolutions in the last 250 years. And these aren't just like new technologies like an iPhone. It's a technological revolution, something that changes humanity. And so we have the Industrial Revolution, the massive shift, bringing people from the farms into cities, into factories. We had steam engines and steel. And that was really big because now we could move stuff around on land and on sea without having to use wind. Plus we had steel. So now we could build big buildings and things like that. Then we went into electricity. Obviously that was big for all of humanity. People lived in the dark. Now we had electricity. And then we had the automobile. So for all of humanity, people walked or rode horses, and now we had automobiles. So those were big technological revolutions. The last one was 1971, was the invention of the microprocessor, 1971. And of course, that microprocessor allows us to do what we're doing today. If you've kept track, or I guess I wasn't spitting out the dates, but those are about every 50 years. And 1971 plus 50 years brings us to where we are today. And we're sitting on a brand new technology, and it's not just a technology, it's a technological revolution that's going to change the world more than we can understand at this point. And it's a technology that allows for decentralization. The reason why this is important is because, one, we're in a period of fourth turning of massive change. Two, the world is rejecting globalization to move back to decentralization. And three, we have a technological revolution with a brand new technology that is specifically built or designed to bring on that decentralization. So that's going to be very, very powerful, and it's going to be scary and exciting at the same time.
It's interesting. I've got a friend, Patrick Byrne, who Patrick was the CEO and chairman of Overstock. Overstock was the first company to take Bitcoin as currency for purchases. And he told me really early that this blockchain was the thing, and it was going to impact my life more than the internet.
Right.
And Patrick says bold things and is often dismissed as wearing a tinfoil hat. I mean, and then generally within a few years of saying something like that, he turns out to be
right.
Exactly right. And plus, he is so smart. Whenever he talks, I'm like, okay, if I don't believe what he says, it's probably because I don't get it. But I mean, he told me very early, as I've, come over the last few years since that statement, I'm like, oh man, he's right.
Yeah.
How do you see this? How do you see these things converging, and how do you see, especially this blockchain revolution? How do you see it affecting our lives?
Well, the first thing I would say is Patrick Byrne. I'm very aware of who he is. I don't know him personally, but he seems to be a very smart man. And to your point, yes, he's been ahead of the curve. But it's what I would say is it's Bitcoin, not blockchain. So you might say the automobile is a really great invention, but it's actually the leather seats that are the best part of it. And it's like, well, the leather seats are part of what makes an automobile good. We obviously have to have a seat, but it's not the automobile. And so blockchain is one piece of what makes Bitcoin so revolutionary. You couldn't take out the seat and say, well, this is what makes the car. No, it's the combination of all of that. And so it's Bitcoin, not blockchain. I just say that. But how does it change things? Well, it changes things on so many different ways. It's hard to imagine because it's a revolution. So if you and I were having this conversation in 1996 or 97, we might be looking at the internet and saying, well, it's a way we can go onto these message boards and we can use chat rooms and we can send electronic messages. And we might even envision, hey, one day we might be able to buy stuff online and things like that. Although, as I said, in 2001, I got laughed out of the room multiple times trying to sell stuff on my website. But we might envision that. But we didn't know that my car would be hooked to something called a cloud, using something called social media to navigate me around traffic. We didn't have any of those building blocks. We didn't know what that was at the time. And so it's hard to imagine exactly what that looks like, but let me give you a couple things. So first off, I would say, if you think about this, that since the beginning of time, since the beginning of man, one of the problems has been storing my wealth, storing my value. So we're the only two people around, and you're going to come kill me and take my chickens, right? And so you and I band together, and now those people are going to come take our chickens and our goats. And so we make a village, and now that village comes over, and then we make a kingdom, and now the kingdom comes and takes our gold, and on and on and on, right? And so now we have, a nation, and they protect, us from other nations. But imagine a world where I could have all my value, all my wealth stored cryptographically, and I just know 12 words in my head, and I secure that, and I can take that with me portably anywhere I want. Nobody can take it from me. Nobody can seize it, steal it, manipulate it. And if I want to send it to you, nobody can stop it, block it, or prevent it. Now, it's taken the oldest problem man has had and taken it away. Now, I don't know exactly where that goes in the future, but I know that that is going to be a major shift into humanity.
Thanks so much for being here and watching that video. And can I ask you to please subscribe to our channel so you can find out when we're posting new content. You'll be alerted right away when we do. To share this with people you think might benefit from the information, and certainly it helps us if you like the video. So if you like what you just saw, go ahead and hit that like button. And again, thank you so much for being here with me right now.